When we look at a comprehensive model of human performance in organizations, we see at the top that we have the organizational performance parameter, and that is made up of the individual performance and work group performance, which function in an amalgam to effectuate the organizational performance and to turn it into something that contributes to the bottom line of the organization. With regard to the organizational performance dimension, we look at a number of dimensions. There's the structure of the organization, the technology that the organization uses to conduct its business, the strategy, the overall strategic plan for the organization, how in line are the things that we do on the individual and group levels, how are they aligned and positioned to contribute as strategic partners to the business bottom line. The environment, this means internal and external, and does certainly predict, affect, and challenge organizational performance depending upon the type of business that the organization is in. Being aware of any of these dynamics is pretty critical, and a good strategy will be flexible enough to respond to internal and external dynamics with regard to environment, strategy, technology, and the structure of the organization should it need to be modified. With regard to individual performance, there are a number of parameters that we have to look at that encompass what individual performance may mean to an organization, and that includes job content, motivation, which is employee engagement, I spoke about that a little earlier, knowledge base, skills, attitudes, the KSAs, the abilities, and also the aptitude. The aptitude, I think, is pretty critical with regard to instructional design, because you have to say, is my workforce equipped to do what I'm asking them to do? Mager and Pipe, 1977, have a lovely little example in their books such that they ask the question, could your employee perform the act that you are trying to teach them at gunpoint? And so while that's a little bit of an extreme example, if you have an employee that no matter how well you trained them, educated them, practiced with them, no matter what job aids you gave them, they still could not perform the act or task that you're asking them to do, if their life depended on it, then you have a fundamental and primary foundational problem that you would have to address and rectify before you could ever expect to get results. And with regard to work group performance, there are a number of things that we also look at. The structure certainly seems to be something that can change and has changed over the years. We've gone from individual contributors to team environments and back and forth with all kinds of different striations and models related thereto. Leadership. Leadership goes in and out of vogue, and depending upon the conditions, the climate, the internal and external climates of organizations, leadership can be much used buzzword that on the day-to-day level doesn't mean a whole lot to the line worker. It's something that I see as a consultant as being one of the most abused terms of probably the past 2 or 3 decades. Cohesiveness, and this is to say, how well does the work group, the team, the organization, the division, whatever the case is, how well do they perform together? In other words, are they actually paying attention to what employees 1, 2, and 3 are doing, so employees 4, 5, and 6 can pick up where they left off and look backward and see if there are errors and make modifications such that those errors do not affect the quality outcome of the product or service that they are trying to put forth. The next dynamic is roles. When I'm talking about how well do they work together and what is the cohesiveness of the group, roles make a difference here. And do the employees have the opportunity, assuming they have the wherewithal, to adjust should they need to? What are the norms? What are the climates and the cultures of the organizations and their subdivisions of work groups? Is it a culture that welcomes innovativeness and strategic involvement? Is it a culture that encourages employees to utter the dreadful phrase, "I'm not paid to think"? Those things have to be considered, especially when you're looking at instructional design. Instructional designers can have great and wonderful lofty goals and design fantastic training modules that give employees all kinds of ideas of being empowered, but if they go back to the front line, whatever their job is, if they are not able to enact that, it's going to create frustration and thusly will affect the motivational factor or the engagement of those employees adversely. So it's something that instructional designers really have to pay attention to. What is the status of the work group performance? In other words, if they're running a number of projects that are always in the red from the status standpoint, in the red from the financial standpoint, to try to enrich their jobs and maybe give them more than they can handle or need or want might be another manifestation of a poor design. Open systems theory is exhibited in your PowerPoint slide references in a very fundamental and generic way. There are lots of different iterations of systems theory that apply to different types of businesses. There seems to be a high application level in the IT space with regard to systems theory because obviously the things that they do are quite interdependent. But in a general sense, when we talk about open systems theory, we're looking at inputs into an operation, and the operation produces outputs. So the feedback from there flows back into both the inputs and the outputs. This is exhibited in your slides so that you can take notes with regard to what open systems theory means. Open systems indicates that we have things coming in from an external perspective as well as an internal perspective that will affect what we do. A closed system is just the opposite. There are no external forces that will change what is going on. And while many organizations might look at their situation and say, oh, we're certainly a closed system, there are very few actual closed systems in existence. So again, if we look at diagnosing performance problems and how that relates to instructional design, we have to ask the question, does the problem stem from a lack of knowledge, skills, or attitudes? And if we can answer yes to any or all of those questions, then indeed we have a situation where training, thus instructional design, would be applicable. So it's important to understand the cumulative picture of what it is that you're looking at and understand what it is that you should do as much as what you shouldn't do. So getting to know the scenario and putting boots on the ground, if you will, and just observing prior to even addressing the question, is training the appropriate answer, is quite important in terms of instructional design. Just having the tools and the good sense to deploy those tools from an analysis standpoint will make you a very valuable instructional designer, and we'll talk a little bit later in the semester about developing yourself as an instructional designer. But just having that element of judgment from a strategic standpoint would make you quite valuable.